Greetings, everybody. We're in Portugal with Jeff Winter. We need no introduction, yet I'll make one. Actually, I copied from you. He's the host and chair of this particular event, the MES and Industry 4.0. And we're talking about the MES and Industry 4.0, of course. And Jeff, talk about how should manufacturing phase MES implementation to avoid long and costly rollouts while still building a scalable foundation.
So anyone that has attempted to do an MES implementation, especially if they have multi-sites, realizes this can take a while. Mm-hmm. And because it's a change in what companies do, you need to get buy-in from everyone. So one of the first things we recommend is taking an agile approach and building up an MVP and using that to get buy-in from everyone, because MES, we believe, is the core of Industry 4.0. It's the part that allows all the other shiny technology out there to work. So you got to get your execution in order before you can do anything else. So you want to have an MVP that everyone can see and understand. And the second aspect I recommend is setting up a COE, or a Center of Excellence. And usually I see this most successfully by setting up an Industry 4.0 Center of Excellence that has MES at the central part of that. So it fits in not just with a rollout, but with the entire vision of how your company is approaching Industry 4.0. And that should have representation from the different business units and the different plants.
Thank you, Jeff. Now, what are the most common internal gaps you see in manufacturers' digital transformation teams, and how can those be addressed early on?
So one of them I'm going to say is actually from a study that I read that came out, I believe it was in 2023 from Helion, that actually evaluated a whole bunch of different use cases out there, and they tracked 10 different barriers to Industry 4.0 and even did relationships amongst them. And what they found is all 10 stemmed from one primary one that had the biggest impact across all 10 barriers, and it was lack of leadership commitment. And that's one of the biggest barriers to successfully implementing Industry 4.0. Now, related to that, and this was actually something that was brought up in several of the presentations at this conference and the panel that we did, was change management. I think everyone in theory knows that they need change management when they do a digital transformation, but the companies up there all underestimated the importance of change management, the amount of time and resources that need to be allocated to it, and how early you should start planning for it. So to help avoid these, you got to start thinking about change management way earlier than you think you do. You need to budget way more than you plan to budget for it, not just in terms of money, but in terms of effort required for your team. And then lastly, you got to make sure that you have leadership commitment before you embark on this journey, because if you don't, chances are it's not going to work.
Got to get the executive buy-in, as well as making sure that you do have that change management process in place.
Yes.
Or budgeted for. All right, now you talk about evaluation. When evaluating digital technologies under Industry 4.0 umbrella, how can manufacturing avoid over-investing in tools that don't scale or deliver real ROI?
So the answer I would give to this is you need to make sure that you have a crystal clear understanding as to why you're actually doing this particular initiative or investing in this technology. And there's usually two different buckets I like to put as to why you would do this. You're either solving a problem, which may be one of the easier, simpler ones to get buy-in from everyone, and that's the one most people focus on, or you're creating a new future, which is an entirely different way of thinking about it, because you're not solving a problem, you're changing the way that your business, for example, creates or captures value. But either way, you need to make sure that you understand exactly why your company is making this initiative so that you don't evaluate it the wrong way. Because a lot of companies, for example, they'll call something transformation, but really if you lift up the hood, it's just a modernization project or an optimization project. And that's not transformative, which means that you're grading it the wrong way. Your people are thinking about it the wrong way. So you need to be able to think about it the right way in order to be successful. And you need to understand what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Some suggestions for how to avoid overspending with it is use some of the famous frameworks that are out there, whether it's Siri, Architect, SESME. There's several vendor neutral frameworks out there that evaluate your Industry 4.0 maturity so you understand where you are and what is possible and the steps along the way to get there so you can see incremental value along the way rather than just shooting for the moon right off the bat.
Great insights, suggestions. Thank you, Jeff. Now, in your experience, what separates the companies that experiment with Industry 4.0 from those that actually transform?
This is about getting back to, I'm going to say, similar to what I said before, is having a clear vision of what you're trying to do and making sure the strategy to achieve that vision is clearly articulated to everyone in the company. The companies that I see that are doing the most advanced Industry 4.0 stuff, when I go ask each of the operations leaders, the transformation leaders, or just departmental or business unit leaders, they all have the exact same answer for what they're trying to achieve, which means not only do they have a clear vision, but everyone understands it, and they understand how their initiatives, how their projects, as they trickle down, roll back up to achieve what the company is trying to achieve with Industry 4.0.
Thank you, Jeff. If you have questions for Jeff, and feel free to leverage the hashtag on the screen.
Wonderful.